everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Carla and Brad Talk About Krautrock. Brad, we made it to our 4th episode.
Right. Full speed ahead into the horizon. How many more of these we got in us? 16, 17, 18?
At least. There's plenty of bands to talk about.
There sure are.
We're on episode 4. We'd love for you to go back and listen to our previous 3 episodes. We talked about Amandul 2, Noi, which I think was one of our favorites, and Can was our last episode. And Brad, who are we talking about today?
Carla, you play for us today? I fly the airplane and you play for us? Deal?
Deal.
We're talking about Agitation Free and their first album, Malesch. Those are the first words you hear on that LP. I don't think I came close to rendering it the way it should have sounded. But in any case, we've done a little bit of a tour around Germany this far. Mm-hmm. We've been in Munich. I believe Amandul's from Munich. Is that right?
I believe so.
That's right. We've been to Dusseldorf, Cologne, and we're finally in Berlin. This is a Berlin-based band that, as far as I can tell, this might just be their own website talking, but they grandfathered a ton of the Berlin Krautrock bands in the respect that a lot of their members passed through on the way to other, maybe better known bands in the Berlin scene. Some of those names are Christopher Franke, a drummer who went to Tangerine Dream, which would seem like a dead-end job for a drummer.
Yes, it would.
But fair enough. If that's your choice, you can make it. Guitarist Axe Genrich, great name for their guitarist, by the way.
For sure.
Went to Guru Guru. Several others passed through on the way to Ashra Temple. And a couple of them, Klaus Schulze, Michael Honig, ultimately made their way to Tangerine Dream as well. Lots of kind of stuff brewing in Berlin in the early 70s. People moving around trying to find their place. But our focus today will be on Agitation Free, which is maybe one of the more obscure bands in this genre, or at least doesn't get the recognition that many of the others do.
Yeah, agreed. They only released 3 records, is that right? Over the course of their tenure?
Yeah, I think I'm disinclined to count these 1990s, year 2000 reunion. We found some live material stuff. And I think it was just the 3. It was Malesch and Second. I don't remember what the third one was called.
And it might just be those 2. The third one might have been just a compilation of some other recorded material that they had that they just decided to put out onto one more record.
And I don't know if that was just a brain drain. People were leaving, people were going to other bands, but we kind of ran with the first album, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I think probably just because it's the one we're going to like better based on everything we'd read.
Well, it's no secret if you've listened to us on any of the other podcasts that neither Brad nor I are big fans of jam bands or real heavy jazz. So the second album leans a little more into that territory. This one to me was also just a little bit more interesting because they used their trip to Egypt, Cyprus, and Lebanon kind of as the catalyst for different sounds and different inspirations that really makes this record very different, and in particular very different from the other 3 that we've covered.
When you think of the name Agitation Free, I can't speak for you, Carla, but I'm more interested in agitation than in free. And I feel like as time wore on, the stuff that I've heard later from them, it was getting a little freer. It was getting a little, not to say that they were locked in a box at all on Malesch, and we'll talk about that, but it just seemed a little looser and jazzier and jammier, and just kind of slips out of my grip.
It had a little too much of like a Grateful Dead jammy sound to me on that second record, which just for the few tracks I've listened to, that's just not really something that I'm a huge fan of. So
yeah, I've always sort of wondered what was interesting about the Dead. We don't need to go too far down this road, but I haven't listened a ton to it. And I haven't listened a ton to it because it's never really grabbed me.
Same.
And they're just kind of noodling away. And the sound doesn't especially, I don't find it interesting. I kind of like a lot of distortion. I like the Bad Trip music.
Same. I need a little distortion.
I don't need Dancing Bears.
Yeah, I don't need Dancing Bears either. And I listened to the Dead for, everyone kind of has their moment, but I was never really super into it.
Yeah.
That was sort of at the same time that Pearl Jam and Nirvana and all that was happening, and I was much more into listening to those bands.
Right. Yeah, no, me too. I was never hooked. So the name, they picked randomly out of a dictionary, an English dictionary. They wanted to have an English name. So they were flipping through the A's, I guess. Got no further than agitation, and they liked that word. The free part is kind of funny. They were playing at a club that wasn't charging any admission, so the sign said agitation with the word free under it.
It was like a happy accident.
Right. And they said, great, we'll run with that. And I think probably the main sort of mouthpiece for the band, particularly like looking back on it, is this guy, Lüülz Ulbrich, who they call Lüül. I think he's the blonde guy.
I think so.
In the photos and videos, yeah. He says they like the name because it represented two aspects of the band's character. And as I said, give me the agitation. I can leave the free.
I could have used more agitation.
This band is not discussed in the Julian Cope book, so it does not make his top 50 albums. So either this is a deep dive into Krautrock, or maybe Julian Cope isn't in charge of this whole thing.
I thought it was funny that it wasn't in his list, because as I was researching them, they kept coming up in All Music Reviews and some of the other review sites that I found is really, and maybe it is because they grandfathered so many other Krautrock bands that people are probably more familiar with, but they could have really made those lists because they really were the pioneers of Tangerine Dream and Ashra Temple and all that, who went on to have a little bit more notoriety.
Right. I mean, everything I've seen suggests that they're very well regarded and that they were very early players. I read in some interview Lüülz say, we weren't the first. Can was out there doing this stuff in the late 60s in Cologne. But at least in Berlin, they were on the bleeding edge here.
I find it interesting that he, in several interviews, referenced that they were the first to bring world music into play. And I don't know that I agree with him on that. I mean, Amandul, Yeti, it's the same time.
Right.
They weren't the only people using a sitar. It's 72.
No, I think that's right. They were certainly more self-conscious about it, right? They traveled, they came back.
Yeah.
It's a focus, it's a theme of the record.
Yes.
In a way that it isn't with Yeti. But, there's a ton of kind of Eastern influence on that Amandul album.
I kept reading that over and over, and I just wanted to be like, maybe you just didn't hear any of that. But the last article I read, I think he was interviewed in 2018, and he's still claiming that.
Right. It seems like it might have been more of a marketing thing with this band, right? Our first album is, it's an Arab word. The cover art is us sitting on, looks like the side of a pyramid, which he says he doesn't like. But on the other hand, they're so in your face with these Eastern sounds, the Middle Eastern. I like it a lot, I guess, but I'm wondering maybe that was just the hook, the angle they were playing. They were a little late to record their first album. It seems like they were on a track to be right in that first wave of Krautrock. This came out in 72, so it wasn't all that late.
But they had formed in 67.
Right.
So it took them a while.
I read one of the interviews that they played a lot of British and American rock, and they actually listed Hang On Sloopy as one of the songs that they would play at their shows. So
it's amazing. OH.
Yeah. And then they said that Lüülz, another Lüülz, there were two Lützes in this band. Lutz Ludwig Kramer went to London, heard some Pink Floyd, early Pink Floyd, and came back with that, and that steered them away from. We saw this with Amandul too, right? That was kind of garage rocky, and then it got psychedelic in a hurry.
And you can see they also cited Jefferson Airplane and Iron Butterfly as influences. I'm not as familiar with Iron Butterfly, but I can see the Jefferson Airplane-esque psychedelic rock San Francisco kind of psychedelic scene that was happening. You could hear that a little bit in this.
It's kind of like psych light. Yeah. Right, in the sense that you can't not compare this record to the Amandul 2 record that we were playing. So that's been in my mind throughout. And you read about how Amandul 2 was really into Hendrix.
Right.
They went to England, and that's what grabbed them. And I feel like maybe the difference between them and Agitation Free, it's basically the difference between Hendrix and that early Pink Floyd.
Totally. It really drove the directions of those bands in totally different ways.
Another influence here was, and we see this again and again, avant-garde composers. I won't say elbowing their way into the room here, but these bands will attach themselves, as Can did, to Stockhausen, or at least those musicians were trained by Stockhausen. These guys found a Swiss composer, Thomas Kessler, who was playing Philip Glass music for them, set up a studio in Berlin where these bands could rehearse. Agitation Free were the first to show up, followed by, again, Tangerine Dream, Ashra Temple. And so that got everything into gear in Berlin, seems like. There is that element of this too.
They also toured quite extensively, which I find to be very different from Neu, Amandul 2. I don't even know if Can toured as much as Agitation Free did.
They seemed like they were more successful, or they were more plugged into things.
They were playing lots of festivals, and between 72 and 74, it felt like they were on tour most of the time.
And this trip that they took to Greece and Cyprus and Egypt was arranged by a consular officer from Cairo in the German government who saw them play at a show, saw some opportunity for cultural exchange, and wanted to bring Krautrock to to Egypt. It might just have been all those early days in the late 60s, tooling around, playing covers. They just had a sense of the industry and how to get around and how to do things, but they seemed much more connected, I guess. Right?
It does have that feeling for sure. And it is interesting because essentially they did start as a cover band. They were playing a lot of covers.
And by the time it's over, they're not even covering their own songs. I mean, it seems like a recurring theme where these bands kind of go in the studio and they just start playing. And then you hear later that, this is true of Can too, right? The live shows, there's no titles for the song.
No, they're just playing. They sound nothing like what was recorded.
There's maybe 2 live YouTube videos of Agitation Free, and I'm watching them and I'm not recognizing the songs. That said, I haven't listened much to their second album. So
yeah, I haven't listened to too much either. I think what I have heard is what played automatically after the record ended on Spotify, and it kind of automatically flips into like the next one. Is it Layla or Lila part 1 and 2, or 2 tracks that they're kind of most known for? I listened to part of part 1, and it's interesting. It's a little different from what you get on Malesch, but again, it weaves into that jammy territory that kind of lost me after a few minutes.
I understand they added a jazz guitarist.
They did.
To what they had in Malesch. We keep forecasting what we're going to say about Malesch. Maybe we'll get there eventually. I think we're both in that kind of, boy, they're on the threshold of like annoying us.
Yes.
But it's also good, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe that was enough to push them over, was having 2 guitarists, 2 drummers, very jam bandy.
And that being said, I think I had texted you this yesterday. Malesch is a tight record. They are fantastic musicians. So
yeah,
for it seeming quite improvised along the way, there is a structure to it, and it's a tight record. It's not like a loosey-goosey jam bandy kind of a thing. There really is some structure to it, even though it feels a bit freeform when you're listening to it.
Yeah, you don't have the impression that this is what they played on Monday, and if they'd recorded on Tuesday, it would have been altogether different. It does seem like there was a plan to it. Maybe we might quibble around the edges with how much there's sort of dressing up before they really get to the song part of the song.
Yes. With that, should we just dive in?
Yeah, let's dive in. Or maybe we should talk a little bit about their tour of...
Oh, yes.
So they're motoring along. It looks like they're going to have a record deal. And then they lose Axe Genrich to Guru Guru and Christopher Franke to Tangerine Dream. So they never quite get over the hump at that point. And then they go on this tour of Egypt, Lebanon, Cyprus, and Greece. And they claim they were the first rock band to perform in this part of the world. And I haven't seen anybody second guess that.
No.
And it sounds like it was a very formative experience for them, but it was also not easy. They could never get their gear through customs. At one point, they played an entire gig in Alexandria through a home stereo system. I'm not sure how that works. And that got unplugged from the wall at some point, and they just had a protracted drum solo while the roadie was trying to get everything back up and going again. And they brought around this tape recorder wherever they went. So I went and looked at what this tape recorder looked like. I mean,
Was it a big...
It's like a cube. Yeah. It's like a 2 foot by 2 foot by 1 foot. So maybe not a cube, right? Powered by D batteries, right? Which are like bigger than your iPhone.
Yes, it weighs 15 pounds.
Right.
Probably a giant microphone on the end with a cord.
Right. And they just had one of their guys carrying it around. I guess you use it for like in the field news reporting. And so they would just record what they heard from the streets, right? They recorded the pilot on the plane.
You gonna play for us today? I don't think so. I fly the airplane and you play for us. Deal? Right. Okay.
So they did all that. They came back, and with all of this crowded in their head, right, I think it tended to affect the kind of sounds they were wanting to make. They do a lot of synth stuff here. For a band that seems to be really about guitar rock, there's like this bass layer of synth underneath a lot of these songs that, I don't know, it adds a depth to them that wouldn't otherwise be there.
I also think that's the link that makes them a krautrock band versus just another psychedelic band. Because you think about Can, Amandul, Neu, they were all doing some kind of synth work or tape manipulation or whatever that was. That I feel like that is the common thread with a lot of the krautrock bands. To me, the synth work was what was so interesting and made them more than just another psychedelic rock band or a prog rock band.
I think that's very true. Like if you took the synth out of this, I would probably find it half as interesting.
Same.
If you took the organ out of this, I'd find it twice as enjoyable.
I kind of dig the organ.
Do you? All right.
Yeah, I do kind of dig the organ. I mean, I don't need a lot of organ, but a little organ is good.
So they have a Hammond organ on this, right? So that's the Doors, that's the Charlatans. Maybe I'm just tracked by those bands into what I expect the organ should do. Like it should be either haunting, like the Doors do, or it should be kind of funky, like the Charlatans. They're doing something different with the organ here. It's a lot of notes. Sometimes it's really just at the forefront of the mix.
Yes, for sure.
I don't know. You're into it?
I am kind of into it. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I think I have a little bit of a bias, which is if someone's noodling around on the guitar, I will tolerate more of that than noodling on the organ. And I think that's just a matter of taste rather than what's actually acceptable.
I just like that it's a little different of a sound.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get bored by the guitar noodling, depending on what we're talking about. Like, is it Jane's Addiction guitar noodling, or is it Grateful Dead guitar noodling? Because that's totally different.
Right. So. And what do you think makes it different? Because I feel like we get a little bit of both on this album. And
is it the distortion? I don't know.
I feel like it must be. I'm lacking the vocabulary.
It's too technical. That's too technical for me to answer. I don't know.
It either rocks or it doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? And whatever it is that goes into the ear and activates that part of my brain that says, yeah. Mm-hmm. It makes my head go up and down, and then sometimes it makes my head go side to side. Like,
exactly.
No.
Fast forward.
Right. Maybe it goes back to that kind of, if your roots are in Hendrix, I'm with you. If your roots are in that kind of early Pink Floyd, sometimes I am. Interstellar Overdrive is a fantastic song.
It really is.
And there's stuff on here that reminds me of that. Mm-hmm. You Play For Us Today reminds me of that. Sahara City reminds me of that.
Definitely.
And then there's other stuff where it just trails off and it loses me. So, should we go song by song?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, first one.
You Play For Us Today.
Right off the bat, this is fantastic. This was what got me saying, let's do this album.
Can I tell you what my note says? My note says, why is this song 7 minutes long?
Yeah.
But the more I listen to it, I get it. But I just feel like it doesn't take shape until about 4 minutes into the song. It's just kind of ebbing and flowing through this journey. Until then, it becomes like a more structured song as we get towards the end.
It has a build up to it, and I'm a sucker for build up. I'm a sucker for like, all right, there's just this synth layer at the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of swarming and worming a little bit, and then you get bass, then you get, right, I think guitar next, a little bit of guitar, then you get the organ, and the drums come in, and I love that. Stereolab does a bit of that. Metronomic Underground is a classic case of that. And it may be just the pace of it. How long does it take before it gets to that part where you're really gripped? But I love this track. I should say, this is a great Christmas episode to do because there are sleigh bells in this song.
There are sleigh bells in here. We should have made a case for this on our Mixtape Diaries Christmas episode.
Right. Maybe we'll sneak it into the playlist, see if anybody catches us. These are menacing mid-tempo sleigh bells. Mm-hmm. I was listening and I thought, somebody else does this. And I had to like take a minute. I Want to Be Your Dog by the Stooges. Those are sleigh bells too.
Oh.
And I think we have to take a minute and put them side by side in the mix here.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, sleigh bells underrated.
This was a good use of sleigh bells.
Right. Another thing that grabbed me when I was listening to this, and I sent you the other track, is the opening to this, where you've just got that synth layer, and then the bass kind of knocking on the door. Sounds very much like, and I wonder if it actually influenced, Spiritualized, one of my favorite tracks that they have off of Ladies and Gentlemen, We're Floating in Space. I Think I'm in Love. I mean, listen to this. Here's You Play For Us Today. Now here's Spiritualized. Jumped out of the mix at me as, wow, Jason Pierce must have been listening to Agitation Free at some point because it's just too much of a coincidence.
It's very, very similar in that it's...
Yeah.
I would be shocked if it wasn't somehow influenced by this because it's too similar.
This is where I think the internet's kind of failed us because I went on a bunch and I would do searches. Spiritualized and Agitation Free. Jane's Addiction, Agitation Free. Nothing. Right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if producers get into the studio and they know this album, if this is a musician's band that doesn't get a lot of attention and love.
That brings up a good point. Is this really a musician's band at the end of the day? Because the two Jane's Addiction songs you sent over, which was 3 Days and...
Then She Did.
And Then She Did. I mean, I would have never thought about that prior to us doing this podcast or listening to Agitation Free, but it is... particularly 3 Days. Very interesting how that song is structured and how these songs are also structured.
Right. Well, and I was just focused on and we'll get to this when we talk about A La Tool. What we talk about it now. There's a part in the third track, A La Tool, where steadily the drums are taking over the mix, the percussion, and you've got marimbas going, you've got some work on the toms, and it just reminds me of that segment of 3 Days where they're coming out of the guitar solos. And the drums are really hammering, and it's getting Perry fired up for this next run at the mic. But you're right. There's that sense of composition and all these different component parts coming together. I mean, You Play For Us Today is a model of that, right?
It really is.
All the drums in this song.
I do like the drums in this song. I think overall I wish that the drums were a little, maybe more in the mix.
You mean throughout the album, or? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a snare drum struck on this track.
No.
It's just toms and bass drum. I think he had a double bass. I think I read on one of the interviews that they were playing with a double bass. And it builds, and when the drums come in, that's when that part of my brain fires.
Yeah.
Killing that momentum is Sahara City.
Really does.
Yeah.
I think overall, I have that feeling with a lot of this record. It's like, oh, it's coming in, it's so good, and then it just drops into the next song and we kind of start all over again.
Right. And I wonder how much thought was given to track order and things like that, right? You build to this climax, and now the next song has to start all the way from scratch and build right up again. Maybe if you're listening to them separately, but not in a row, right? You don't feel like, oh, I got to go through this whole project again. All right, so Sahara City, they jump right back into a tape recording. There's like a belly dancing street performance that they recorded. Then this really kind of trippy drum effect that I thought was maybe just some distorted drum recording, but now I'm thinking comes from the synth. I went down a rabbit hole with the synth.
You did go down a rabbit hole.
So they were using a...
You sent the manual.
I said, Carla, the manual. And she humored me and read a fair bit of it.
I did read some of it.
So according to Michael Honig, they were using 4 EMS Synthi A's. It's a little suitcase-looking thing. You flip up the lid and it's got all the dials on the top. So there's no accompanying keyboard, it's just the panel. The Synthi AKS, the next-gen model that came out in 1972, did have an optional flat 3-octave keyboard. And I was able to find some YouTube videos of people playing the Synthi AKS. They were doing stuff that sounded a lot like the opening to Sahara City. I wrote our resident synth expert last night, Sean Rieger. Have you ever seen the videos that he posts online?
I have not.
He has his own one-person band called File Transfer Protocol, and he records himself playing in his home studio, and it's ridiculous. It's just it's massive, just like panels of analog synths with wires, like jumping in all directions, and he's tweaking knobs and pushing buttons, and it all makes sense to him, not to me. So I wrote about this. He said, it's a very rare and now very valuable analog synth. It was the odd duck of the synth world. And he noted that Brian Eno used one a lot, and that it was a favorite of Tangerine Dream. So
that makes sense.
So there's that kind of whoop, 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 whoop that kind of goes on for a while.
My note on this one was, sounds like they're tuning their instruments for 5.5 minutes before
Yeah.
anything comes together. This is a common note for me on this record.
There's a lot of it happening here. There's a little wah-wah pedal in the beginning, and it's got that kind of noise. We're going to use the wah-wah in a way that you would not expect, and it's not going to be funky at all. So, okay, kind of cool. Then the woodblock comes in.
The woodblock.
I feel like George Michael Bluth showed up with his woodblock. Just kind of sidled up, and they couldn't get rid of him. I was playing it this morning, and I came to realize that the woodblock sets the rhythm.
It does.
The 45 plus seconds of it are taking this formless thing at the beginning and giving a kind of skeleton to it and standing it up. But you could have done that with drums.
Yeah, I found it interesting that that's what they chose to use. But in the spirit of experimentation, right? It's like, well, let's use something totally different.
The last 2 minutes of this totally rock and are awesome.
It's awesome. The last 2 minutes are amazing.
ratio is just off. 6 minutes of rocking and 2 minutes of intro would have been fine.
I would prefer that.
But when you flip it, let me ask you this question. If the intro was its own track, then you had the rock track. That's what Noi did.
That's what, yes.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't just tolerate that. We like that.
Yeah. And that I kept trying to think about it in that way too. Think about how some of the other bands we've listened to have structured their records, and that's what they've done. That would have been its own 6-minute track. Except Noi might have then played it backwards or sped it up or slowed it down.
Right.
So
and it might have been 3 minutes and 5 minutes instead of 6 minutes of the weirdness and 2. This made me think of the second Stone Roses album that I waited 6 years for. And then when I turned it on, I had to wait through 5 minutes of nothing before the song came on.
Yeah.
I think, to be fair, the intro here is way more varied and interesting than what the Stone Roses put me through before Break Into Heaven came on.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And that just goes to show, I guess, that hashish makes better music than cocaine does.
I think so. I think that's our takeaway here.
Right. But maybe a little too much hashish, too.
Maybe a little too much.
A la Tool next.
Very heavy synth on this one.
Yeah, it's kind of jazzy for me.
I actually liked this track. That wasn't jazz I don't mind so much. I like the interesting synth work.
Yeah. This is where my notes say maybe we should talk about the organ. Because I feel like the organ was becoming a little too much for me here.
The organ was pretty prevalent in this one.
Yeah. There's a point maybe 2/3 of the way in where it sounded like Stereolab to me. It sounded like mid-late career Stereolab, like Sound Dust. And I like that. And I wondered if Stereolab had just softened me to it, and if Stereolab had done some stuff that sounded like the beginning of the track. I'd have been
right.
Too. Stereolab can make no mistakes, as far as I'm concerned. That kind of drum thing at the end, very cool. The marimbas. Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll do another side-by-side thing right here with 3 Days and A La Tool, and the listener can decide whether I'm grasping. Here's Agitation Free. Here's Jane's Addiction.
I feel like this one in particular was less noodly in the beginning, but it could be just because it's so synth heavy.
I feel like they definitely started from a peak, and this was where it started to kind of slip a little bit for me. But great minds don't have to think alike.
Well, I tend to tolerate a little bit more jazz than you do, ultimately.
Yeah.
You are very hard. Like, nope, it's jazz.
Yep. Walking away.
There's a lot of jazz that I like, so I can tolerate it a little bit more.
It shuts down.
That's a hard pass for you. So.
Yeah. All right, you had some things to say about Pulse.
Oh. So also A La Tool is the end of side 1 on the actual LP. Then the first song on side 2 is Pulse. To me, it's the worst side B track 1 choice ever. It just drones on. It's my least favorite of all the tracks.
I didn't even think think about that until you texted it last night. I didn't think of it as side B track 1, and you're right. Again, it's sequencing these tracks. You know, I mean, if you shuffle them, you might get a better
mix, which might play into if they had a producer on this record, maybe that would have helped.
Right. I didn't mind this song. I absolutely 100% get your point about placement. This is another one of those songs with build up, maybe more experimental than You Play For Us Today, but again, there's the synth at the bottom of the protocol stack. Although here it's organ, then guitar, then drums coming in. I guess I'm a sucker for like the Krautrock build-up tracks.
I like the Krautrock build-up, but I don't need it to be like 4 minutes of build-up, and I feel like I'm getting that pretty consistently.
My notes say this is the music that you hear in the soundtrack of a movie when a character is going crazy. And then it just stops, right? It's like the fuse blew.
We should note there's no vocals on this record, so ultimately it does have a cinematic quality to it. It could be a soundtrack. They've all done soundtrack work for films and TV shows and things, so it does have that. It does have that element to it.
It locates you in a very particular place because of the travels that they had, the tape segments that they're using. They're actually, when I went to Discogs to see who was playing what, there are vocals on here credited. So then I had to go back and listen. I'm like, well, where are the vocals?
Yeah, where are the vocals?
It's just a little bit of wailing at the beginning of If You Play For Us Today, and the next song, Con El Khalili. And I think it's the organist.
There's no lyrics though.
No, it's a drummer. No lyrics at all. It's just
sounds.
And I think he's kind of hacking a little bit. He's like, yeah. So vocalizing, but no words.
No words.
Yeah. So Con El Khalili I liked a lot.
I really liked that. This is probably one of my favorite songs on the record.
It's not a rocker. It's not a banger.
It has a good groove to it, though, which is what I really loved the bass line in it, and I just felt like it had a good groove, and it actually felt like a more formalized song.
Thought about Noi at this point. I was hearing things with the way the bass and the guitar were reacting to each other, and it was beautiful to me, and it was warming to me, and I thought, what? I've heard something like this. And looking at my list of songs on my iTunes, however many there are, 30,000, and I'm like, I'm never gonna find it. And then I realized that this reminds me of Noi, which is the right answer because it's like all I listen to lately. The beginning part sounds a lot like the kind of experimental stuff from the first Noi album, which came out around the same time. I think it's kind of cool to kind of put these bands side by side and what were they doing at the same time. But it sounds a little bit like Seeland in Noi 75 to me, anyway. I might be at this point in my life where I like bands when they sound like Noi and I don't like them when they don't.
I think that's what it's come to.
Yeah. You're so much better than me because you also listen to Can.
Yeah. I've really gone into a Can rabbit hole, but that's a conversation for another day.
Good for you. Good for you. No, this is a beautiful song. Okay, now Malesch. This seems like it's supposed to be the centerpiece of the LP. It's the title track. It's the longest track. And I think probably their sense of this was that it's building up to this.
I don't know. It's also if it is the title track of the record, when you look at the sequencing again, it's the second to the last song. An odd placement, I think, for a title track. Like, if that's your showpiece song, it's the name of the album, and it's the second to the last. I don't know. I think the sequencing kind of off, but...
Well, and if it's building up to this, but this is the least, at least to me, inspired of the songs.
I wrote that I liked the keyboard work, but again, the song doesn't form until about 3 minutes in. I like there's a transition. There's like a tempo change that happens about 5.5 minutes in. That's kind of cool. I kind of like the way the tempo shifts around. It just starts to sound like a Grateful Dead song to me, and that's like when it loses me at that point.
I think that's right. Like, somebody needs to start howling.
Like, yes,
right? String needs to break. Something needs to, like, it's for agitation.
It needed our pal Zuke to start manipulating tape or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the point where I put it side by side with I'm on Duel too, and I think, it needs to rock more.
It's like they didn't quite get there. It just needed something else. And when the tempo changed, I thought we were going to get there, and then it just went down this looser, Dead kind of way that I was like, oh, that was kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I wanted this to build to a climax, but instead it was like an 8-minute climb down from the previous track, right? Mm-hmm. And again, it could be just hit shuffle on these songs, play them in whatever order Siri decides.
Yeah.
And you might think this album. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of organ in this. Many, many organ notes.
There's a lot of organ in this one. Again, I didn't mind that so much, but I just really wanted it to just keep pushing, and it just didn't do that.
The last one, Rookstores, if I said that right. I like this. This is a nice little thing at the end.
I loved it.
It's got a good hook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This to me was like the one fully formed song on the record. It's only 2 minutes and 19 seconds.
Right.
So it's like they
jumps in,
chopped out all the other stuff and just got right into it. But then it just stops.
Yeah. Get in, get out.
You're like really into it, and then it's just silence.
And again, it makes me think of Sahara City, where you got 2 minutes of just something that was really great. And you're like, you could have done that for days, and I'd be on board. Yeah, just give me more of this.
Agreed. I would have liked to have heard more of the songs to sound like this song.
Yeah.
And maybe less of the build-up. Definitely less of the build-up on those other tracks. I just don't know that you need 4 to 5 minutes of that on every track.
I think what's interesting about these guys is that we've tended to agree on everything to this point. And they're pushing enough that I'm starting to see a little more daylight between me and you. I'm like, I kind of like the build-up. And you're like, no. I hate the organs. You're like, no, I like them. Right? They're stress testing our alliance here.
I think so.
And that's cool. We can't be in lockstep all the time.
That's right. I found a quote from a Guardian article that there was a good description of Agitation Free. And it said, "For here is a truly cosmic music, a blend of krautrock, psychedelia, jazz, and a strikingly well-structured ambient sort of funkiness that can only come from fantastically talented musicians spending hour upon hour upon hour playing for no one's pleasure but their own."
Right. And that aligns with the definition of jazz that I sent you.
It
Brad's
really
definition
does.
of jazz. If they're having more fun than you are, it's jazz. Yeah.
Exactly.
When they're good, they're really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't say when they're bad, they're unlistenable. It's just okay.
I don't think it's
right?
unlistenable because they are fantastic musicians. It's just not something that either one of us is really into, ultimately.
Right.
It's not bad. It's just not interesting.
Yeah. It's taking me right up to the doorstep of stuff that I would not tolerate.
It's taking us to the doorstep of prog rock.
So that was my next question. I was going to ask you the question that we ask every time. Is this prog?
Oh, it's so close.
Yeah.
It's the closest of the 4 bands we've talked about now.
A little storytelling here. If the test for is this prog is you're playing this at work and one of your coworkers comes to your office and you immediately go, this isn't prog rock. I'm doing a Krautrock podcast with an old friend of mine, and if you think this is prog, I'm not really listening to. And I was like, okay, that's a bad sign.
That's a bad sign.
Because when you melt down in front of your coworker who's like, I don't care one way or the other what you listen to.
Don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
Well, when I started to see that most of the reviews of this record or any of their records are on prog rock websites, like much more so than Can or Noi or Module 2, I was like, ooh,
yeah,
it does lend itself more to a prog rock, proto prog rock.
And if your band members have wax figures in the, what is it called?
That's amazing.
The progressive rock room of the Wax Museum in Tokyo.
That was crazy. I wish that was still open.
Yeah. So Tokyo Tower, there's a wax museum. Lüülz and Honig. And if you're going to pick two, Lüülz was the guitar player and Michael Honig was the synth guy. Those are the two key elements. They had wax figures made of them. By the way, the photos... I didn't see photos of those two, but the photo of Frank Zappa, wax figure, it could have been a cartoon character of Frank Zappa, but it did not. No one was going to confuse that with a human being.
No.
So, second-rate wax museum in Tokyo.
Madame Tussauds, it was not.
Right, but apparently the owner was a big prog rock fan and a big Krautrock fan, so there was a lot of these guys in there.
Well, there was a note in that article that I sent that Lüülz said that man was sponsoring them. So I don't know if he was like paying for some of their records or literally sponsoring them to go to Japan or what that meant. But that's how they ended up as wax figures in that museum.
That's fascinating. What people can do with their money. And thank God, right?
Right.
You could give it to psychotic Republican congressional candidates, or
you can fund a prog rock band. Yeah.
So, unfortunately, that closed in 2013, and you wonder if these wax figures are somewhere.
Yeah, what did they do with them?
The two Faust guys
So he also said in that article that a lot of the memorabilia that was in there was from that man's personal collection. So maybe it just went back to that man's home or storage.
Right.
Storage garage.
He just sits in a room with all the Krautrock greats around him.
Krautrock wax figures.
Right. Go drop some acid, put on Yeti today.
Right.
Hang with Faust.
Right.
Love it.
I don't know. So bizarre.
So the other question I was going to ask you is, do you think this is new, different, interesting for its time?
I don't. I think that when we listen to Noi and even some Can, many of their songs feel out of time.
Right.
I think you can very clearly put this record in late 60s, early 70s. I don't find it, when you think about the other, psychedelic bands that were really kind of having their moment in the early 70s, I don't find this too entirely different from that.
Yeah, because Piper of the Gates of Dawn came out in 67.
Mm-hmm.
And this is 5 years later.
Yes.
And Pink Floyd had moved on.
Mm-hmm.
They were playing the blues.
Right.
But these guys are in Germany, so they can't play the blues. That's out. That is against the rules.
Yes.
They added the synths to it, so that was cool.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, what I'm attracted to, because it's the most interesting part of it. But it's in service of kind of maybe more of the same.
That's what I think. I think the synth is what sets it apart and makes it easier to put in this Krautrock genre. But ultimately, it's a bit of the time.
Yeah. And again, to be clear, like at least 4 or 5 of these tracks I find delightful, and I've got the vinyl on its way.
Yeah,
right?
You committed.
I did, yeah. And I'm excited to get it. Yeah, I don't feel like it's groundbreaking. And maybe that was it. Maybe if you were going to break ground, you were going to move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ashra Temple pushes the envelope a little more.
Yeah.
Tangerine Dream breaks the envelope, whatever you want to say about him. And maybe we will someday.
That's going to be a tough one.
Yeah. It's maybe the difference between appreciating and liking, right?
Yes. There's also so many records. Surely we can find one that...
Yeah.
They have a lot of albums.
Right. It's the sifting through that'll be painful.
Yes.
Anything more we want to say about Agitation Free?
Should I tell the story about the sound engineer that they didn't like on this record?
Yeah, because I think that may have played a role in some of our grievances here. Yeah.
I think it puts some of it into context. This also came out of the Lüülz interview, which was from 2018, but they didn't have a producer on this record, which I think tells a chunk of the story of why sequencing is the way it is, why there's this jammy situation happening in the beginning of the songs. It just didn't really have anyone kind of leading the show.
Discipline.
But he also but he also made the point to say, and you could tell he's still upset about this, that they did not like their sound engineer. Apparently the sound engineer was waiting for them to get started, but they had actually started on all of these songs and they were doing this build up. So it would be one instrument and then another and then another. And as we've talked about, there's 4 to 5 minutes of this happening on most of these songs.
Right.
Well, the sound engineer would then cut in and say, oh, okay, do I need to start recording now? There was a lot of this. He was upset because that was supposed to be part of the song, and the sound engineer was not recording for a good chunk of what they were doing.
Right. Oh, were you playing a song? Wasn't obvious that you were playing a song.
And they would get upset and then have to start all over again, and the sound engineer would start recording. So this kept happening. And so he tells this whole story about that, and then he makes mention that he feels the second album is better because they had a better sound engineer. So he continues to throw the sound engineer under the bus all these years later.
It seems as though there are a lot of people who really love that second album.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go on Reddit, people are asking, what else should I listen to? And someone says, well, you should listen to Fish. If that's what you're aiming for, right, then great. You found the sound engineer you wanted. But maybe the sound engineer you needed, I'm trying to go Batman here, the sound engineer you deserved, was the one who was saying, how about when you start a song, I'll turn this on.
Right.
And maybe a producer could have said, you have some really great elements here. Let's explore those and maybe a little less of, as you said, the tuning, right?
Yeah. I was like, are they just tuning their instruments through all of these songs? What's going on?
You would have sucked as their sound engineer. He'd have hated you.
Yes, they would have hated me as their sound engineer. Why are all of our songs only 2.5 minutes? Because that's the only time you were playing.
Right. And to be fair to us, if we sound like Philistines who aren't ready for experimental, interesting, exploratory music, it's true that, I don't know. I mean, I grew up listening to 3-minute songs. Maybe they were too long because it was all punk rock. But I want more of the good stuff. Give me 7 minutes of the end of Sahara City, right?
Right. No, agreed. Trust me, there was a part of me through listening to this, I was like, I think this might just be lost on me. This just may be one of those records that my ears just don't get it. Like, maybe I just don't get it.
Yeah, it's hit and miss with me. You had said you'd give it a B.
I'd give it a B.
Yeah. I give it a B because some tracks are A's, A pluses, and some are C's and C minuses.
Right, yeah, agreed.
Which is better than just B all the way through, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's Carla and Brad talk about Agitation Free.
When we don't have anything else left to say.
Right. You play for us today? We don't have the first clue how to end this episode.
I think we well covered Agitation Free.
Lüülz, if you're out there and you want to counterpoint with us, give us a call.
We'll love
bring
that.
You on.
We'll bring you on. We'll do a follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely. We need more musicians on here. You can find us on Apple Music. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Google Play. I think in any of those places you can rate us. Why don't you give us 5 stars if you like us? And if you don't like us, you don't have to rate us.
Just don't rate us.
Just don't rate us. You don't have to listen to us, and we'll call the whole thing off. Everybody walks away. Everybody's happy. Move on. This was Carla and Brad talking about Krautrock. Stay tuned for episode 5, where we bring you... Well, we don't know what we're going to bring you. But
we don't know yet. It's my pick.
It's Carla's
We'll
pick.
figure it out.
Hope you have a great holiday, and if you hear sleigh balls, it could be Krautrock. That'll do.